She'll forgive me like always. Alicia Morgan stopped moving outside the council chamber doors. Inside, Crown Prince Jackson's voice continued, lazy and certain. She's too loyal to leave. She always comes back. Laughter followed. Alicia looked down at the ceremonial documents pressed against her chest. The ones she'd been carrying to him for 7 years. Then she turned around and walked away. Silent. Controlled. Final. And that was the exact moment she stopped belonging to him. Snow hammered against the narrow windows of Valadorn's citadel. Servants rushed past carrying winter cloaks and wine for the nobles gathering upstairs. No one looked at Alicia twice. They never did. She had been the woman who appeared whenever the crown prince needed something handled quietly. The one who stood beside him during negotiations no one else could survive. The one who stayed when everyone else walked away. That was why the guards near the council entrance had barely glanced at her when she approached moments earlier. One had nodded slightly. The prince is inside. Alicia had nodded back. I know. She had reached the chamber doors just as voices spilled into the hallway. The doors weren't fully closed. That was unusual. Jackson hated carelessness during council meetings. Then she had heard the laughter. Not the polite kind. The kind that came easy. Comfortable. A councilman's voice had echoed first. Your Highness, if Lady Alicia discovers the arrangement before the ceremony. Jackson's voice had cut through smoothly. She'll forgive me like always. The documents had pressed against her ribs, suddenly heavier. Inside, someone else had spoken carefully. You sound certain. I am, Jackson had replied. A pause, then his voice had dropped lower, almost lazy. She's too loyal to leave. She always comes back. More laughter had followed. Alicia's fingers had tightened around the leather binding of the folder. Not because she was shocked. Because suddenly, everything made perfect sense. The distance over the past few weeks. The late meetings he stopped explaining. The way he looked past her lately instead of at her. She had thought Jackson trusted her. Thought the years spent protecting him meant something beyond politics. Inside the chamber, chairs had scraped against stone floors. Conversation had shifted toward military routes and border alliances. But Alicia had stopped hearing any of it. She had stepped backward carefully. One step. Then another. Silent. Controlled. Then she had turned and walked away from the council chamber without making a sound. Without confronting him. Without crying. Without hesitation. And that was the exact moment Alicia Morgan stopped belonging to the Crown Prince of Valadorn. By the time the palace bells rang for evening prayers, Alicia was already gone. Not through the main gates where guards checked every departure. Not through the royal halls where servants noticed everything. Through the Eastern Archive corridor that led past the old servant quarters into the lower city. She moved quickly, carrying only a single travel satchel and the dark winter cloak she had hidden in her chambers weeks earlier. A kitchen servant spotted her near the lower stairwell descending toward the outer district. Alicia, the woman called. You're leaving during council session. Alicia kept walking. Yes. The servant hesitated. Does the prince know? Alicia didn't answer. Minutes later, the eastern service gate opened briefly, then shut again behind her. No alarm sounded. No one cared enough to report it. Inside the citadel, preparations for the winter ascension ceremony continued normally. Nobles drank expensive wine imported from the southern territories. Servants polished ceremonial armor meant for Jackson's coronation next week. And Crown Prince Jackson Bennett sat at the head of the council table reviewing military maps without noticing anything wrong. A servant entered the chamber carrying fresh documents. Your Highness, the succession contracts. Jackson waved one hand without looking up. Where is Alicia? The room quieted slightly. The servant froze. Your Highness. Jackson looked up immediately. Alicia. She was supposed to bring the coronation ledgers an hour ago. Another servant glanced toward the doorway nervously. I thought she was with the archive staff. She was here earlier, someone else added quickly. Jackson stood slowly. The movement alone silenced the entire chamber. Find her. One guard hesitated near the door. Your Highness, perhaps she simply returned to her chambers. Find her. No anger. No shouting. That made it worse. The guards scattered immediately. Orders spread across the palace within seconds. Servants rushed through corridors checking rooms, gardens, storage halls. But Alicia Morgan was already beyond the outer district walls. And for the first time since entering Jackson's palace 7 years ago, no one knew where she was. The search lasted less than 30 minutes before the first problem became obvious. Alicia hadn't disappeared accidentally. She had left deliberately. A guard returned to the council chamber breathing hard. "Your Highness, her chambers are empty." Jackson's expression hardened instantly. "Empty how?" "No belongings. No clothing. Nothing." Another guard stepped forward carefully. The Eastern Service gate was opened during shift change. Silence dropped across the room like ice. One councilman frowned. "That gate leads directly into the lower city. She couldn't have gone far." Jackson ignored him completely. "When was it opened?" he asked. The guard swallowed. "Roughly an hour after the council session began." That landed hard. Jackson's jaw tightened slightly. The councilman noticed immediately. "Your Highness." Jackson didn't answer right away. Instead, he replayed the meeting in his head. The half-open doors. The laughter. His own voice echoing into the corridor. "She'll forgive me like always." A slow realization settled across the chamber before anyone said it aloud. "She heard us," Jackson said finally. Silence followed. One council member shifted uncomfortably. "That's impossible." "The doors weren't fully closed," Jackson replied coldly. Another councilman tried dismissing it quickly. "Even if she overheard part of the conversation, she understands how politics work." Jackson looked at him. Cold. "You think this is about politics?" No one answered. Because suddenly, it wasn't. A servant entered carefully. "Your Highness, we found something in the courtyard." Jackson turned instantly. "What?" The servant hesitated, then spoke quietly. "Her royal crest. Burned." That confirmed everything. This wasn't emotional. It was planned. Jackson walked past the council table immediately. "Prepare riders," he ordered. A captain stepped forward. "Your Highness, we still don't know where she intended to go." Jackson stopped at the chamber doorway without turning around. "She heard exactly what I said," he replied. "She left because she believed it." And that was the first moment Crown Prince Jackson Bennett realized something dangerous. Alicia hadn't run impulsively. She had decided. If you've ever watched someone realize too late what they destroyed with their own pride, stay with this story until the end. Because every choice made tonight comes back like a storm no crown can survive. And if stories built on betrayal, power, and consequences pull you in, hit that subscribe button now. Now let's get back to the story. The palace courtyard exploded into motion. Guards mounted horses. Scouts rushed toward the outer roads. Orders moved faster than the wind cutting across the stone walls. Jackson descended the palace steps without slowing. A captain hurried beside him. "Your Highness, trackers are checking the lower districts now." "She won't stay near the city," Jackson replied. "You think she planned farther than that?" "Yes." The answer came too quickly to question. Jackson grabbed the reins of his horse and pulled himself into the saddle in one smooth movement. A councilman appeared at the top of the stairs. "Your Highness, this is excessive." Jackson looked at him once. That was enough to silence him. The gates opened immediately. Riders surged out into the night. Hours later, they found the first trail near the Eastern Service path beyond the lower market district. One scout crouched beside the dirt road. "Small footprints," he said. "One traveler, moving fast." Jackson dismounted instantly. "How old?" "Several hours." Another tracker stepped closer, frowning. "There's almost no scent." Jackson looked down sharply. The tracker pointed toward the shallow river nearby. "She crossed through water repeatedly." A pause, then the realization hit. "She's masking the trail intentionally," the captain said. Jackson's jaw tightened slightly. Alicia had planned this carefully. Not emotional. Not reckless. Deliberate. The scout moved farther down the path, then stopped suddenly. "Your Highness." Jackson approached immediately. The trail split near the forest edge. 3 different directions. Minimal scent. Minimal tracks. "She scattered the route," the tracker muttered. "Smart." Jackson stared at the ground silently, then one faint detail caught his attention. Broken bark on a northern tree. Fresh. Intentional. She went north, he said immediately. The captain frowned. That leads toward rival territory. Jackson mounted his horse again. Then that's where we go. Your Highness, the captain warned carefully, if she crosses those borders. Jackson cut him off. She already did the moment she walked out. The riders moved again, faster this time, because now the prince understood the truth. Alicia wasn't trying to hide temporarily. She was trying to disappear completely. Meanwhile, miles ahead, Alicia walked steadily through the frozen forest path. Her breath came out in white clouds. The cloak kept most of the cold out, but not all of it. She didn't stop. Behind her, the palace lights disappeared beyond the mountain ridge. Ahead, the northern border fortress waited in the distance. For the first time in 7 years, Alicia felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. Freedom. Not the kind that came from permission. The kind that came from choosing herself when no one else would. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small leather pouch. Inside were the copied documents she had quietly removed from the royal archives weeks earlier. Succession records. Execution orders. Falsified testimonies. Everything the council had hidden about her father's death. Everything they thought no one would ever find. Alicia tied the pouch securely and kept walking. Jackson could chase her across the kingdom if he wanted. But she wasn't running from him anymore. She was running toward the truth. By dawn, Alicia reached the northern border fortress. Massive black gates towered above the mountain pass, marked with the crest of King Marcus stone. Enemy territory. Exactly what she wanted. 2 guards crossed their spears the second she approached. Stop there, one ordered. Alicia stopped, barely. What territory? The second guard asked. None, she replied. That answer immediately changed the atmosphere. The guards exchanged a quick glance. No pack, one asked carefully. Not anymore. The first guard studied her torn cloak and exhausted expression. You crossed alone. Yes. That's either brave or stupid. I'm still alive, Alicia replied. Before the guards could answer, heavy footsteps echoed behind them. Both guards straightened instantly. A man emerged from the fortress gate dressed entirely in dark armor, his presence silencing the entire checkpoint without effort. King Marcus Stone. Alicia recognized him immediately. Everyone did. Marcus's gaze settled on her first, not the guards. You crossed voluntarily, he asked. His voice was calm. Controlled. Alicia nodded once. Yes. Running from someone? No. Then why come here? Alicia held his gaze directly. Because your enemies won't send me back. One guard inhaled sharply under his breath. Marcus didn't react immediately. He stepped closer instead. Close enough to notice the fading scent of Jackson's territory still lingering on her clothes. You belong to Bennett territory, he said. Not anymore. Another pause. Marcus looked toward the southern ridgeline beyond the mountains, like he already knew who would eventually come searching. Then he looked back at her. And if Jackson Bennett arrives demanding your return? Alicia answered immediately. He can demand whatever he wants. That response almost earned a reaction from him. Almost. Marcus turned toward the guards. Open the gates. The guards hesitated. Your Majesty, one warned quietly. Taking her in could start. I know exactly what it starts, Marcus replied. The gates opened slowly behind him. Marcus stepped aside slightly and looked at Alicia again. You entered voluntarily, he said. You leave the same way. Alicia walked forward without hesitation. And the moment she crossed the gates, Jackson lost the right to command her back. Jackson reached the northern ridge less than an hour later. Too late. The moment his horse stopped at the edge of the fortress valley, he saw the gates already open. And Alicia standing inside them. Safe. Behind enemy walls. A captain beside him swore quietly. She crossed. Jackson said nothing. Below, the fortress guards immediately raised weapons at the sight of approaching riders. Marcus Stone stepped out through the gates moments later. Calm. Unhurried. Like he had expected this. His gaze moved past the soldiers and landed directly on Jackson. She entered voluntarily, Marcus said first. Jackson dismounted immediately. Move aside. No. The refusal landed hard across the valley. Jackson stepped forward. This doesn't concern you. Marcus almost looked amused. You brought your problem to my border. It concerns me now. Then Alicia appeared beside him. Jackson's focus shifted instantly. Alicia. She didn't move toward him. Didn't lower her eyes. Didn't soften. That hit harder than the border itself. Jackson took another step. Come back. No. The answer came immediately. One word. Final. Jackson's jaw tightened. You heard part of a conversation and decided to run? Alicia looked at him steadily. I heard enough. That meeting wasn't meant for you. That's the excuse, she asked calmly. Not denial. Silence. Marcus glanced between them but stayed quiet. Jackson tried again. You misunderstood what was happening. No, Alicia replied. I understood perfectly. A pause. Then she said the words directly back to him. She'll forgive me like always. She's too loyal to leave. She always comes back. The valley went silent. Even Jackson didn't interrupt. You said it, Alicia continued. And everyone in that room agreed with you. Jackson finally answered. Alicia. No, she cut in. You already explained exactly what I was to you. That landed clean. Public. Irreversible. Jackson looked at her for a long second, then realized the worst part. She wasn't emotional anymore. She was done. The silence between the fortress gates stretched dangerously thin. Jackson stepped forward first. She belongs to my territory, he said. Marcus answered immediately. She walked out of it. That doesn't remove my claim. Alicia laughed once. Not softly. Not kindly. Both men looked at her. You're still doing it, she said to Jackson. His gaze hardened. Doing what? Talking about me like I'm property. Jackson took another step toward the gate. Alicia, this ends now. Come back. No. Enough, he snapped. The single word echoed sharply across the valley, but Alicia didn't flinch. That was new. Marcus noticed it too. Jackson's voice lowered. You don't understand what crossing into this territory means. Alicia met his gaze directly. I understood it before I crossed. You're standing inside enemy walls. I know. And you trust him? Jackson asked sharply, glancing at Marcus. Alicia answered without hesitation. More than I trusted the man who said I'd stay no matter what he did. That landed harder than any insult. Jackson went still. Marcus stepped slightly forward then, not aggressively, but enough to shift the balance clearly. She requested sanctuary, he said calmly. I accepted. Jackson's eyes narrowed. You involve yourself too easily. No, Marcus replied. You lost control too carelessly. The guards behind Jackson shifted immediately. Tension rose fast. One wrong move and the border would turn violent. Jackson ignored everyone except Alicia. Come home, he said again. This time his voice lacked command. That was worse. Alicia shook her head once. You already had home, she replied. You treated it like certainty. Silence. Then Marcus spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. She remains here unless she chooses otherwise. Jackson looked at him coldly. You think this ends with a closed gate? Marcus's expression never changed. No, he said. I think it ended the moment she heard you. That was the first thing anyone said all night that Jackson couldn't argue against. Because it was true. And they all knew it. Jackson didn't leave, even after the fortress guards tightened formation. Even after the northern gates began closing slowly behind Alicia. He stayed exactly where he was, watching her. Alicia, he said again. This time she sounded tired when she answered. Why? The question stopped him. Not because it was emotional. Because he didn't immediately have an answer. You left without speaking to me, he said finally. Alicia stared at him. Would it have mattered? Yes. A pause. Then she shook her head once. No, she replied. You already decided what I would tolerate. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. Jackson stepped closer to the gate. You were never temporary. Alicia almost smiled at that. Almost. But I was manageable, she said. Silence. You expected adjustment, she continued. You expected loyalty. You expected me to stay after hearing you speak about me like I was convenient. Jackson's voice lowered. I was wrong. That surprised everyone. The guards. The captains. Even Marcus glanced at him briefly. But Alicia didn't move. Because the apology came too late. You weren't wrong when you said it, she replied calmly. You were comfortable. That landed harder. Jackson looked at her steadily. Come back with me. No. I'll end the alliance. That's not the point. I'll make this right. Alicia exhaled slowly, then repeated his own words back to him one final time. She'll forgive me like always. Silence spread again. You believe that completely, she said. That's why I left. The fortress gates moved lower behind her, almost closed now. Jackson stepped forward instinctively. The guards immediately raised weapons. Marcus didn't move. Didn't need to. Because Alicia spoke first. Don't, she said. Jackson stopped instantly. And for the first time since becoming crown prince, he realized power meant absolutely nothing when the person he wanted was already gone. The fortress gates closed completely. Heavy iron slammed into place between the two territories with a final sound that echoed across the valley. Jackson didn't move. His soldiers stayed behind him silently, waiting for orders that never came. Because there was nothing left to command. Inside the fortress walls, Alicia kept walking. No hesitation. No looking back. Marcus matched her pace beside her through the stone corridor leading deeper into the fortress. You don't intend to return, he said. It wasn't a question. No, Alicia replied immediately. Marcus glanced at her briefly. Not even for closure. Alicia let out a quiet breath. I already heard it. That answer ended the conversation for a moment. Behind them, distant war horns suddenly sounded across the border. Low. Threatening. The guards along the fortress walls immediately straightened. One captain approached quickly. Your Majesty, Bennett forces are still gathered outside. Marcus didn't slow his pace. Let them gather. And if they advance? Then they advance. The captain nodded and disappeared immediately. Alicia looked ahead calmly. You think he'll start a war? No, Marcus replied. You sound certain. I think he finally understands something. Alicia glanced at him. What? Marcus's answer came simple and direct. That control and loyalty aren't the same thing. Silence settled briefly again. Then Alicia gave a small nod. Because that was exactly the lesson Jackson learned too late. Ahead, the fortress doors opened into the inner hall. Warm light spilled across the stone floor. Safety. Distance. Choice. Real choice. Marcus stopped beside the entrance and looked at her once more. You crossed voluntarily, he said. You remain the same way. Alicia held his gaze for a second, then stepped inside without hesitation. Behind her, beyond the closed gates and sounding war horns, Jackson Bennett remained on the ridge. Not as a crown prince. Not as a ruler. Just a man who believed she would always stay and lost her the moment she proved him wrong. 3 days later, the Eclipse Summit began at Black Hollow Fortress near the neutral border zone. Every major kingdom sent representatives. Vale Dorn. Norhaven. The Southern Trade Alliance. The Eastern War families. It was supposed to be a routine political gathering. But the moment Alicia Morgan walked into the summit hall beside King Marcus Stone, everything changed. She wasn't dressed like the forgotten palace advisor anymore. She wore a dark emerald military cloak with silver insignias bearing the ancient crest of House Morgan. The ceremonial blade once belonging to her executed father hung at her side. And the documents she carried weren't political proposals. They were evidence. Jackson stood near the front of the hall surrounded by his counsel when Alicia entered. The second he saw her, every other conversation in the room became irrelevant. Their eyes met across the crowded space. And for the first time in 7 years, Alicia didn't look away first. A Norhaven official stepped forward to open the summit. Representatives of the Allied Kingdoms, we gather today to discuss border security and trade. I have a matter to present first, Alicia said clearly. The room went silent. The official hesitated. Lady Morgan, this session has a scheduled agenda. This won't take long, she replied. Marcus didn't stop her. Jackson stepped forward immediately. Alicia, what are you doing? She looked at him directly. What I should have done 7 years ago. Then she placed the leather pouch on the center table and opened it. Documents spilled across the polished wood. Execution orders. Falsified testimony. Succession records with entire bloodlines erased. One councilman from Valadorn's delegation went pale. Another tried standing. This is inappropriate. Sit down, Marcus said quietly. The councilman sat. Alicia picked up the first document. 17 years ago, Thomas Morgan served as heir protector to the Valedorn throne. His role was to verify succession legitimacy and prevent corruption within the royal bloodline. She placed the document down and picked up another. He discovered that the current succession line had been altered. 3 legitimate heirs were removed from records and replaced with council-approved candidates. Jackson's expression hardened. Alicia. When my father reported this to the crown, she continued, ignoring him, he was arrested for treason. Executed within a week. No trial. No investigation. Silence spread across the hall like ice. The official record states he attempted to overthrow the throne, Alicia said. But the evidence in front of you tells a different story. She laid out the final documents. Signatures. Dates. Testimonies from witnesses who vanished weeks after my father's execution. One of Jackson's councilmen stood abruptly. These documents are fabricated. They're originals, Alicia replied calmly. Copied from the royal archives before I left. Feel free to verify them yourselves. The councilman sat back down. Jackson stared at the documents, then at Alicia. You're saying my family's claim to the throne is false? No, Alicia replied. I'm saying it was built on a lie. That distinction mattered. Jackson wasn't illegitimate. But his power was. Another voice called out from the back of the hall. If this is true, why didn't you speak sooner? Alicia looked toward the speaker. Because I spent 7 years believing the man I stood beside deserved my loyalty more than my father deserved justice. She paused. I was wrong. Jackson finally spoke again. You think this absolves you of leaving? Alicia turned toward him slowly. I don't need absolution, she said. I needed to stop protecting the people who destroyed my family. Silence. Then Jackson asked the question he should have asked weeks ago. Why didn't you tell me the truth? And Alicia answered with the line that broke him completely. Because you never noticed I was drowning while standing beside you. The summit hall went completely still. Not because the answer was cruel. Because it was true. Jackson had spent 7 years depending on Alicia's loyalty without ever asking what it cost her to give it. One of the foreign delegates spoke carefully. If these documents are verified, the succession will need to be reviewed. Jackson's lead councilman stood immediately. That would destabilize the entire kingdom. Then you should have thought about that before you executed an innocent man, Alicia replied. Marcus stepped forward then. The summit will adjourn temporarily while independent investigators verify the documents, he said. Until then, no action will be taken against Lady Morgan. Jackson looked at him sharply. You're protecting her. I'm protecting the truth, Marcus replied. The two men stared at each other for a long moment. Then Jackson turned back to Alicia. You planned this, he said quietly. Yes. For how long? Since the night I heard you say I'd always forgive you. That landed like a final blow. Because Jackson realized something he should have understood from the beginning. Alicia hadn't left because of jealousy. She hadn't left because of another woman. She left because she finally understood that staying meant betraying herself. And no amount of loyalty was worth that. The summit erupted into chaos after Alicia's revelation. Delegates demanded investigations. Councilmen shouted denials. Accusations flew across the hall like arrows. But Alicia remained perfectly calm. Because this was exactly what she had planned. Jackson pushed through the crowd toward her. "We need to talk," he said. "Alone." Alicia looked at him. "There's nothing left to say. You just accused my family of treason in front of every kingdom in the region." "I accused your council," Alicia corrected. "Not you." Jackson stopped. That distinction hadn't occurred to him. "You think I knew?" he asked quietly. "No," Alicia replied. "I think you didn't care enough to ask." Silence. Then Jackson said something that surprised her. "You're right." Alicia blinked. Jackson exhaled slowly. "I spent 7 years taking your presence for granted," he continued. "I assumed you'd always be there because you always were. I didn't ask what you needed. I didn't notice when you started disappearing even while standing beside me." He paused. "I treated your loyalty like a resource instead of a gift." For the first time since the summit began, Alicia didn't have an immediate response. Because this was the first time Jackson had ever admitted fault without making excuses. "That doesn't change what happened," she said finally. "I know. It doesn't erase the years I wasted protecting people who destroyed my father. I know. And it doesn't mean I'm coming back." Jackson looked at her steadily. "I know that too." Silence stretched between them. Then Jackson asked the question that mattered most. "What do you want, Alicia?" She answered immediately. "I want my father's name cleared. I want the truth on record. And I want to stop being invisible." Jackson nodded slowly. "Then I'll help you." Alicia frowned. "Why?" "Because you were right," Jackson replied. "About all of it." He gestured toward the council delegation across the hall. "They manipulated me as much as they manipulated you. The difference is you figured it out. I didn't." Alicia studied him carefully. This wasn't the arrogant prince who dismissed her loyalty. This was someone finally waking up. "Helping me could cost you the throne," she said. Jackson's expression didn't change. "Then maybe I don't deserve it." That answer surprised her more than anything else he could have said. For 7 years, Jackson had defined himself by power. And now he was willing to risk it for the truth. Before Alicia could respond, Marcus appeared beside them. "The investigators are ready," he said. Jackson looked at Alicia one last time. "Whatever they find," he said quietly, "I won't fight it." Then he walked toward the council table without waiting for her response. Alicia watched him go. And for the first time since leaving the palace, she felt something unexpected. Not forgiveness. But the beginning of closure. The investigation took 3 days. Independent scholars verified every document Alicia provided. They cross-referenced execution orders with archived testimonies. They tracked down surviving witnesses who had disappeared after Thomas Morgan's death. And slowly, carefully, the truth emerged. Thomas Morgan had been executed to silence him. The succession records had been altered. 3 legitimate bloodlines had been erased to consolidate council power. And Crown Prince Jackson Bennett's claim to the throne, while not entirely false, was built on a foundation of corruption he never knew existed. When the findings were announced publicly, the reaction was immediate. Protests erupted in the lower districts. Noble families demanded accountability. The royal council tried deflecting blame. But the evidence was undeniable. Jackson stood in the throne room alone the night the investigation concluded. The crown sat on the table in front of him. Heavy. Gold. Meaningless. A knock echoed at the door. "Enter," Jackson said. Alicia stepped inside. She looked different. Not because of her clothes or her posture. Because she carried herself like someone who had finally stopped apologizing for existing. "I didn't expect to see you here," Jackson said. "I came to say goodbye," Alicia replied. Jackson nodded slowly. "Where will you go?" "Norhaven offered me a position in their archives," she said. "King Marcus thinks I'd be good at preventing the kind of corruption that destroyed my family." You would be. Silence. Then Alicia asked the question she had been avoiding. What will you do? Jackson looked at the crown. I'm abdicating, he said simply. Alicia's eyes widened. What? The council corrupted the succession to put my family in power, Jackson replied. I can't rule a kingdom built on that foundation. But you didn't know. It doesn't matter, Jackson interrupted. I benefited from it. That's enough. Alicia stared at him. This was the last thing she had expected. Who will take the throne? The legitimate heir, Jackson said. One of the bloodlines the council erased. Investigators found surviving members. They'll restore the proper succession. He picked up the crown and held it for a moment. Then he set it back down. I spent my entire life preparing to wear this, he said quietly. But I never asked if I deserved it. Alicia stepped closer. You're doing the right thing. Jackson looked at her. I learned that from you. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Just honest. I'm sorry, Jackson said finally. For everything. Alicia nodded once. I know. Does that mean? No, she said gently. It doesn't. Jackson exhaled slowly. I understand. And he did. Because some things, once broken, can't be repaired by apologies alone. Alicia turned toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, she said, I think you'll be better without the crown than you ever were with it. Then she left. And Jackson stood alone in the throne room, finally understanding what Alicia had known all along. Power without integrity is just control. And control without trust is nothing. 6 months later, Alicia stood in the Norhaven archives organizing historical records. The work was quiet. Methodical. Honest. Everything the palace had never been. She had her own chambers now. Her own salary. Her own choices. And for the first time in years, she slept without wondering if someone would take it all away. A messenger arrived one afternoon carrying a sealed letter. Alicia opened it carefully. The handwriting was familiar. Alicia. The succession has been restored. The true heir was crowned last week. The council members responsible for your father's execution have been removed from power. Your father's name has been cleared. Officially. Publicly. I wanted you to know. I also wanted you to know that I'm leaving Valedorn. Not as punishment. As choice. I'm traveling south to study governance in the smaller territories. I want to learn how to lead without relying on power I didn't earn. Maybe one day I'll be worthy of the kind of loyalty you gave me. But I'm not there yet. Thank you for showing me the difference. Jackson. Alicia read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in her desk drawer. Not to forget. But to remember that some endings are necessary for better beginnings. Outside her window, snow fell gently across the Norhaven mountains. The same kind of snow that had fallen the night she walked away from the palace. But this time, Alicia wasn't running. She was exactly where she chose to be. And that made all the difference. A knock sounded at her door. Come in, she called. King Marcus entered carrying a stack of old documents. I need your expertise, he said. We found records suggesting trade route corruption dating back 40 years. Alicia smiled. Let me see them. Marcus placed the documents on her desk. You're good at this, he said. I had practice, Alicia replied. Marcus nodded once, then turned to leave. Alicia, he said at the door. Yes. I'm glad you stayed. She looked up at him. So am I. And she meant it. Because staying wasn't weakness. Leaving wasn't betrayal. And choosing herself wasn't selfishness. It was survival. Weeks later, Alicia received word that her father's memorial had been erected in the Vale-Dorn Capitol Square. A statue honoring the heir protector who died defending the truth. She didn't attend the ceremony. Not because she didn't care, but because closure didn't require her presence. Her father's legacy was restored. The corruption was exposed. And Alicia had finally stopped carrying weight that was never hers to hold. That was enough. One evening, while organizing archived letters, Alicia found a journal entry she had written years earlier. "I don't know how much longer I can do this. Every day I stand beside him, and every day I disappear a little more. But leaving feels impossible. Where would I even go?" She read it twice. Then she wrote a single line beneath it. "Anywhere I choose." And closed the journal. Because the woman who wrote that entry didn't exist anymore. She had walked away from the palace. Crossed enemy borders. Exposed buried truths. And rebuilt herself into someone who didn't need permission to exist. Alicia Morgan wasn't invisible anymore. And she never would be again. That night, she stood at her window watching snow fall across the mountains. Behind her, the archive glowed with warm candlelight. Ahead, the future stretched open and uncertain. But for the first time in her life, Alicia wasn't afraid of uncertainty. Because she had learned the most important lesson of all. Loyalty given freely is a gift. But loyalty taken for granted becomes a prison. And the only person who could unlock that prison was her. So she did. And she never looked back. Before you go, do 3 things for Alicia. Hit like if her story moved you. That single tap helps someone else who needs to hear it tonight find this video. Drop a comment and tell me, when exactly did Alicia stop belonging to Jackson? The laughter. The burned crest. The closing gates. I read every reply. And subscribe before you leave. The next story follows a woman betrayed by the sister she raised with her own hands, and her revenge is quieter and far more devastating than anything Alicia did. Tap subscribe, turn on the bell, and I'll see you the moment it drops.